I'm Ryan Lightfoot-Brown of FundCalibre, and welcome to the podcast Investing on the Go. We're joined today by Tom Slater, manager of the Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust. Thank you very much for joining us, Tom.
That's great to be here.
Can you tell me a little bit about the long-term trends that you're seeing in your investments in the portfolio?
Well, so much of what goes on in markets is about whatever today's headline is. And, we go from being experts in trade negotiations to predicting the impacts of tsunamis to the outcomes of military confrontations. But actually, I think a lot of those things are extremely hard to predict. There are already a lot of very clever, very well-paid people who are trying to do it, and actually a lot of them are just unpredictable. And so for us, we try to focus more on long-run underlying trends which actually do seem completely predictable. So, for example, Moore's Law. But also, if you look at developments in telecommunications networks and this speed of moving data around the world, if you look at the cost of generating energy from solar panels, it's been on an exponentially declining curve. If you look at the cost of energy storage and batteries, it's on this exponential cost decline curve. And none of these things are really driven by inventions or technology breakthroughs. They're driven by the application of scale and capital. And in that sense are actually really quite predictable. And so what we focus on is saying, well, if you have some of these trends, which are almost go so far as to say inevitable, what are the consequences of that? If we know that what we're able to do with computer vision will be vastly better than it is today in 5 years' time, if we know that batteries will be substantially cheaper than they are today in 5 years' time, why would you bet against the fact that we'll move to electrification of the transport fleet? Why would you build new coal-fired power stations today if you know that the cost of competing forms of energy generation will be substantially lower in 5 years' time? And so actually thinking through which are the companies that are either benefiting from these changes or, in fact, if you look at much of the portfolio, driving these changes and building that future, we think that is a really good way to generate performance for your clients.
And batteries is perhaps one area we haven't really seen a huge amount of change in the original technology from perhaps its inception to date. If that's going to be a big thing in 5 years' time, do we need a revolution, is it? Or is it going to be an evolution of like you said, things going at scale?
Yeah, I think the latter. If you look at the progress that Tesla have made in electric vehicles, and I think this is a great example. Electric vehicles aren't going to come about because the technology somehow was ready and had met its time. They've come about because of one company and one leader who has pushed through that revolution in electric vehicles and really demonstrated what you could do with this technology. The response from the traditional automotive industry has been cumbersome and slow. I'm sure it will come. I hope it will come. But it's the change has been driven by a disruptive company pursuing a different model. And even when they launched the Model S, the luxury sedan, it didn't really ring alarm bells across the industry. It was the launch of the Model 3, the mass market vehicle, and suddenly they took 400,000 pre-orders in the space of 3 weeks in the most profitable category of product in the car industry. And that's when the boardrooms in Detroit and Munich woke up to the fact that we actually have to implement this change. And so now where do you go from here? Well, if you look at Tesla's Gigafactory, which is a huge facility producing the battery cells for their electric vehicles, it in one facility it will match the entire world output of lithium-ion battery cells at the point of the commissioning of the factory. So you do that sort of step change in scale, and it brings down costs. You drive efficiencies in the supply chain. Small things like you no longer have to pay import tariffs on bringing these cells over from Japan. That's 2% out of your cost chain immediately. But there's all sorts of other ways of driving efficiency when you have that scale. And will there be breakthroughs in chemistry and material science? I'd be fairly optimistic that there will, but you don't need those. You need to drive scale, and that's what we've seen. That's what's driven this significant improvement in range and performance that you've seen over the past 5 years. And I think it's pretty predictable that with continued progress, continued scale, improvements in software, that you follow that type of trajectory, and that progress will be much, much faster than you see in traditional internal combustion engines. So the relative position of the two, I think, changes really quite dramatically on a 5 or 10 year view.
And perhaps one of the other technologies we see is going to make a huge change is the invention or the implementation of 5G. Do you sort of have any view on where the winners are going to be on that, or is it going to be such a big change that it's more about just getting any exposure? Yeah,
so it's a really interesting question, and I think it's hard to say at this point. Now, if you look at the progress that's been made in improving speed, decreasing latency in these networks, what we've seen to date is that the value that's come from that has accrued to services companies. It's Facebook, it's Alphabet, it's Alibaba, it's Tencent. It's the companies that provide the services we consume through these faster data pipes. It hasn't generally been in anything like the same way the providers of the infrastructure. So the question then is, for me, do you think there's anything that will change that trend of the value accruing to services? And then who do you think will provide those services? Now, I think it's reasonably predictable that these big audience aggregation platforms will continue to do well and will be big beneficiaries of faster speeds. But I think it also opens the door and creates opportunities for a whole host of other businesses. So I think we'll see the impacts of that really broadly. I think the companies that will be most challenged by it are those that aren't preparing to take advantage of the new data speeds that we'll see.
Okay, and you touched on Moore's law at the beginning about the cost of computing power every 18 months. Now, just sort of 10, 12 years ago, we didn't even have sort of the computing power you talk about. I mean, what most people be listening to now on their mobile phone. Do you think this is going to get exponentially faster, or do you still think that sort of 18 months timeline is going to continue?
I think that the whole industry generally is geared around it continuing at this rate. That's the investment cycles. That's the way the industry works. I think I think a different way of looking at it is to say, in the abstract, Moore's law is this concept which we can't really relate well to. But think about it in the context of the retail industry. If I have a physical store, what I can do today in terms of merchandising my products is pretty much what I could do 10 years ago. At the margin, there maybe been some improvement, but it hasn't changed dramatically. But if you look at the shop front of an online retailer today versus 10 years ago, there's dramatic change. The resolution of the screens, the precision of the images, the detail that you can see, the fact that you don't have to sit down at a terminal with a big cathode ray tube monitor to look at it's a sleek device that you pull out of your pocket that you have with you all the time, that you can have real-time alerts that can use artificial intelligence to project the clothes onto you, that can recognize your face. The retail experience has got better and better. And it's that real world manifestation of the progress in clock speeds and technology that has really shifted the industry. Now, we're some way into that in retail, but I think it has much, much further to go. There are still big categories to unlock, but it's all sorts of other industries that are now starting to experience that change. And whether that's connecting devices that have historically not been connected to one another, collecting data from sensors across a broad swathe of services and driving those services more efficiently. Healthcare, a huge one that again has been relatively slow to change in reaction to new technologies. But we think particularly the progress that's been made in sequencing and driving down the cost of genomic sequencing will create massive new opportunities.
And are there any other major trends that you're tapping into in the fund?
We'll stick with that one, for example, in genomics. Right, this is what we're used to in healthcare is that costs go up every year for procedures, for tests, for doctors, for insurance. The one big exception to that has been the cost of genomic sequencing, which has fallen 1 millionfold in the past decade. And that's driving massive progress in our understanding of the molecular basis of disease. It's creating the opportunity for a whole new different therapeutic pathways. And we've seen lots of new drugs enter the clinic, which have the opportunity to make a real difference for patients, often based on companion diagnostics. So not just trying to give the same drug to everybody, but matching the drugs to the people who will benefit the most from them. But we also see it in some of the different services that you might be able to provide. So one of our holdings is Grail, a company which does blood tests for cancer. And this is something we've never been able to do before because the costs of doing it have been prohibitively high. It's not as specific as doctors would have wanted. But as you follow this trajectory of rapidly improving accuracy, rapidly declining cost, you create this new market, which we think will have the potential to be hundreds of billions of dollars in the future. So that's one area that I think is quite exciting. Another would be in the field of autonomous machines. That we've achieved a scale of compute power that we can now drive autonomy into some of the devices that we use. Now, the most high profile and controversial one at the moment is in the automotive industry. And I think that's becoming a reality right now. And I think the real questions are going to be about the regulatory frameworks and how that's governed. But a less controversial example would be our holding in Zipline, who make autonomous aircraft. Now, Zipline's autonomous aircraft are now delivering blood to patients in need in Sub-Saharan Africa. The supply chains historically have been really challenged in that part of the world because the issue with a short shelf life product like blood is either you store it centrally and reduce wastage, or you store it at the points of need, but then you get huge wastage because you have to keep a stock at all these endpoints and you don't know where you're going to need it. What Zipline allows is that you centralize the storage of blood, but then you can bypass the difficult infrastructure and actually get these products really quickly to the places that they're needed. And they're saving hundreds, if not thousands, of lives already by using autonomous aircraft in this instance to deliver these products. They're expanding rapidly by geography, but also in terms of the types of product that they're delivering. So it's not just blood. Something like the rabies vaccine, it has a very short shelf life. You need to give it to a patient within 24 hours of them contracting the disease. So again, it makes real sense to store it centrally and distribute it. So I think that's another really interesting area that's actually moving very quickly.
Well, Tom, that's been really, really very interesting. Thank you very much for listening. I've been Ryan Lightfoot Brown, and if you'd like to listen to more of our Investing on the Go podcast, please subscribe to FundCalibre.